a request for proposals for design services for a variety of water system improvements on the island, including the Tunstall Bay Reservoir. We have recently hired Urban Systems to help us with that project. And Glenn is the project manager and is on the call with us today. Initially, we thought that it might make sense to look at combining systems. There's supply and storage needs in other West Side water systems, Blue Water, Bowen Bay, and Tunstall Bay, and King Edward Bay. We've gone through the preliminary considerations around that and decided that there probably isn't a good business case for looking at combining Tunstall Bay with the other three. So we're on to looking at moving forward with the design process for the reservoir tank. And we would probably look at early next year, maybe February of next year, to have the preliminary design process for that completed to bring back to the community. And if there's particular questions about the status of that project, Glenn is joining us and can speak to that. In terms of other operational issues, the system is operating well. There has been no real issues other than one of the well pumps needs to be replaced on one of the shallow wells. That's we've got a general budget item to deal with capital replacement. Some of the PRVs in the system are very old, and we need to plan for replacement to advance the asset management plan.
Having trouble hearing.
Can everybody mute themselves? Somebody's got some background noise. It sounds like a radio or something. Peter, you haven't got any background noise? No? Your door shut, Patrick? Have you got somebody from the Muni? No?
No, door shut.
Thank you, Allison.
So in terms of other, there may be other work that's identified as we go through the design process for the reservoir. There may be other related upgrades that are required. I don't have other updates on the utility at this point. If there's any questions about this, we can address that.
The only question I have, we've been waiting so long for this new reservoir. When do you honestly believe that it will actually be installed? I mean, we've had the electrical up there for a couple of years just sitting empty, and we've been going on this for over 10 years and we still don't have it. So I'd like to know, you've said in February you might, they're going to start, but when is the actual tank going to, would you believe it will be installed?
Okay, well, I can throw out a possible time frame here, and Glenn might have to correct me, but we're probably looking at March, April, June, into May or June for design work, and having a cost estimate that we can confirm our financing requirements from. And one of the questions around time frame is going to be the financing piece, because the cost of the reservoir is going to exceed the available reserves. Raj has indicated that there may be a finance or a borrowing process that doesn't take nearly as long as our long-term borrowing that requires a community referendum. And if we're able to access funds through that process and proceed with tendering of the work in summer end of summer of next year, it's feasible to have the tank constructed next year. I don't know if you have any thoughts about that, Glenn, about the feasibility of doing that before the end of 2021.
Looks like he's trying to figure out how to unmute.
Yeah, for some reason, my it must have been locked or something. I couldn't unmute myself. Yeah, thanks, Patrick. I think in general that's good. Just to clarify the February timeframe, we're looking at sort of firming up what are the strategic decisions to either supplement. I know a few years ago there was cost estimates that had already been prepared for two options. One is full replacement of the existing reservoir. Another one was to twin it or supplement. I think both of those options are still on the table. So we're now looking at that a little bit closer and formulating a recommendation for that February timeframe. Once that decision is made, then it's the design exercise shouldn't take that long. And I think Patrick's time estimate of May, June seems pretty reasonable. If finance can be confirmed in and around that time frame or shortly thereafter, then we get into a tendering process. And I think it's possible that construction could get underway in the latter half of 2021 or perhaps 2022 as a safeguard if something influences our ability for 2021.
So a key step in there is going to be, once we have our design and cost estimates, confirming how we pay for it, what sort of financing arrangements we want to make, and are we going to borrow a certain amount of money over a 10-year term or a 15-year term, and how do we get the approval of the Tunstall Bay residents to agree to those financing terms. So that would have to happen, mid next year.
So just as a bit of history and background, because this has been talked about for a number of years, I thought the decision had been made and looking at recommendation number 18 in the letter, that report we did to council back in November last year, that it was to be a 99-gallon tank. 99 gallons?
100,000 gallons.
Yeah, 100,000 gallon, 99,000 gallon tank.
Yeah.
And the other one was to stay up there until it fell apart, but
Correct.
I'm not sure about, whether. So I'm just curious as to what's involved in if it's going to be a bolted steel tank, what's involved in the design?
Well, you're right. There isn't really a complex design, and one of the things that we were looking at, in fact, we just completed our site visit today, this morning, actually, up at the site. And we wanted to look at space availability and determine whether or not there was any geohazards that may limit positioning. And we're still waiting to get final comments back from the geotechnical engineer, but generally things look pretty good up there. I think there's room to put in another tank. I think the decision really is around um, sort of the remaining life of that existing tank, which seems pretty reasonable from a initial visual inspection. So at this point, I think we still need to look at a couple things and give some consideration to make a final decision, but I agree that adding a supplemental tank is likely the way to go, but there's some things that we would like to further consider. If it is going to be a steel tank, you're correct that generally the design is more of a set of specifications that then go to suppliers. And it's not much of a design. There's some geotech and some piping work and site planning work that has to happen. That would be the bulk of the design, but yes, we're not designing the tank itself.
And is it enough money that it's worth going for the infrastructure planning grant to pay for it, which is the other point that was in that November 2019?
Patrick may need to address
So
that.
this is the $10,000.
Yeah,
We can look into that. In terms of,
that was a request that they apply for an infrastructure planning grant to fund the design and planning of the storage tank. But if it's only a, if it's a fairly simple $2,000 or $3,000 job, then it's not probably worth applying for the grant.
no, it's probably enough that it's worth.
Oh, okay.
Grant, so we can take that forward.
They turn those around pretty quickly. It's a continuous intake.
Does anyone else have questions for Glenn or Patrick?
I have one question, Steph. Am I unmuted?
Yeah.
We're good. We can hear you.
We're good. Okay, thank you. What I want to know is if we do this as a supplement tank, when the existing tank goes, let's say it went in 3 years, as an example, do we have to go through this whole process again?
If you do 100, no. If you do 50, yes. Correct, Glenn?
Yeah.
Okay, so we need to do the 100.
That's why we want to look at things a little bit more closely. If the existing tank is that close to its end of life, it would not make sense to rely on it. I think we're looking for something with likely in the range of 10 years plus of remaining service life to have a solid conclusion that we would only supplement it.
So is that the existing tank from the beginning of the Tunstall Bay development that's there?
Yes, it is.
So it's 50 years old.
Yeah,
I thought there was a stave tank that got destroyed and that one put in.
there was a wooden tank that fell down probably 15 years ago.
Okay.
More than that.
Yeah, and it could be more than that.
Yeah, I remember it well.
Yeah.
There was a lot of people without water, but okay.
Yeah.
I'm just concerned about a Band-Aid solution. And with now so few part-time people there, the use of those tanks is way, way up.
Exactly.
Well, I mean, it's a concrete tank, so cracking and leakage is really the only thing, assuming it's been.
Okay, so it is concrete.
It's a concrete tank, yeah. So theoretically, it should last. The only thing that's unknown is whether it was, and it's unlikely that it was built for seismic load. The seismic criteria has changed recently, and seismic requirements have been around for a while, but they were recently changed.
Mm-hmm.
So the standard for seismic today is quite different than what it would have been when that tank was built. So I would say that's probably the bigger risk. When I was there today, there's one joint that is showing some signs of seepage, but it's not a big deal and it's probably easily repaired. But a concrete tank should last a long, long time. There's no other effect. So.
And the only way to figure that out is to drain it and go inside and have a look and all that stuff, right?
Well, that's certainly the case with other forms of tanks. With a concrete tank, I'm not sure that it would be necessary to go inside in this case. But that's one of my next steps, is to engage our structural guy to take a look at it and give a, only because I'm not a structural engineer, so I'd like a second opinion on it, but things look reasonable at this stage.
We had to drain ours and go inside and have a look in order to get a feel for just how good it was, because
Yeah.
the chlorine eats away at the rebar
Yeah.
Mhm.
side.
Thank you.
Are there any more questions for Patrick or Glenn? Patrick, did you mention the aquifer study? That's on our list here. Is that relevant? For...
Yeah, I haven't, but we did do an extensive monitoring program and study of the west side aquifer that supports the other three west side water systems, Bowen Bay, King Edward Bay, and Blue Water. And the scope of that study didn't extend to the Tunstall Bay aquifer area. It was really driven by signs of stress in the supply from the other systems. That may be something that we want to do, is to get a better understanding of the Tunstall Bay aquifer and its capacity to support growth within the system, and to be a reliable supply for a sustainable future. So we have included, and Raj will go over the budget, capital budget later. There's an allowance in there related to master planning that would be able to cover something like that.
Anyone have any questions about aquifer?
I have one follow-up comment that I thought would be of interest. One of the things we've been looking at in our work for each of the systems we're looking at is just giving consideration for the fire underwriters evaluation and how that may influence insurance. For the Tunstall Bay, there's two water systems on island that fire underwriter survey indicate that with improvements, insurance rates could improve, and that's the Blue Water and the Eagle Cliff. All the other systems, including Tunstall, they feel that increased storage wouldn't influence insurance rates. They feel that the level of service meets their minimum standard, which is a combination of not only the infrastructure, but the firefighting service on island. So I just would offer that. And that's just for information, not to swing any decision whatsoever. It's wise, obviously, to meet standard by having adequate fire protection. And with more volume, you would be better protected, but it won't influence fire underwriter survey or insurance premiums.
Right.
Anyone have any questions about that? Patrick, do you have anything more to share outside of?
No, there was a list of follow-up items from last year's LAC meetings, and there isn't really anything on that list that additional that pertains to Tunstall Bay.
I don't know if the LAC members that report, it was all the information in LAC meetings from last year were compiled, and recommendations were compiled and sent to council, and then these have been provided like a status update on each of those activities for your reference, just to keep you up to date on the tracking of those. Well, I think we might be heading over to the finance department then. You ready for us, Raj?
Thanks, Steph. Yeah, I'm going to just share the screen and basically I've got a PowerPoint. So I've got some slides that duplicate that replicate the information that was sent out. Are you seeing my PowerPoint on your screens now? Yeah. Okay.
Yes, it's there.
So essentially the objective of the financial section here is to explain to the LAC members the cost pressures for the 2021 budget and provide the local area committee with information that's proposed to be included in the 5-year financial plan for the operating and capital budgets, and then for the LAC to make a recommendation to council. In terms of the operating budget, just a little bit of information about the utilities budget. So the expenses for each water system must be supported by the revenues collected from the system. So there is no other funding source for expenditures incurred within the water system. And the expenditure provisions in the Tunstall Bay water system are comprised of administrative costs and direct costs. System administrative costs include costs like allocation of administrative salaries and benefits, municipality liability insurance, audit fees, IT support costs, municipal hall rental. There's an allocation made for a percentage of the rent, and an office and supplies postage allocation. In terms of the direct costs, they include operating wages of our utilities operators, supplies and services costs of maintaining the system, contract services incurred in each system, property insurance relative to insurable value of assets of each system, and the maintenance and infrastructure of, or the maintenance of infrastructure and equipment rather, and any utility costs that are incurred in operation of the equipment owned by the water system. So getting into the specific cost pressures for the 2021 operating budget, essentially the expenditure pressures to the system are being driven by an increase in salary and benefit costs of $4,700 and a required contribution to capital reserves to address the infrastructure funding shortfall to reserves, in contrast to the long-term anticipated maintenance replacement costs of the Tunstall Bay infrastructure. So those cost pressures being taken into consideration, we're looking at a 20% increase to water rates in 2021, to primarily driven by, as I mentioned earlier, an increase to capital reserves to be able to take care of the replacement need and maintenance needs of the infrastructure. Those increases would be spread over, generally over connected, 130 connected properties, and you have 14 unconnected properties in Tunstall Bay. So taking those those pressures into consideration, we would require $161,100 in revenue through utility rates in 2021.
Great, Raj. Is everyone able to see this?
Oh, I can make it a bit bigger.
Thank you so much.
How's that?
Is that okay with everybody?
Yeah.
Sorry, Doug, you're muted. Were you saying something?
So essentially, we would need to generate $161,100 in utility rates revenue in 2021, in comparison to $134,700 in 2020, which represents the 20% increase I spoke to in the previous slide. Now, as you can see in the expenditure items, this would increase the contribution to the capital reserve from $57,500 to $77,200, and it takes into consideration the increase in salaries and benefits costs being allocated to Tunstall Bay of about $3,700. Are there any questions on the operating? And then what we've done is essentially in the outer years, we've assumed a 15% increase in rates, almost all of it going towards the transfer to capital reserves, and accounted for an inflationary increase in the administrative and operating expenses. We're not aware of any large increase that would take place in the ongoing expenditures of the Tunstall Bay water system.
The only comment is 20% is unbelievable. If it was the whole municipal, I mean, 20%, my God. It sounds high, but if that's what it has to be, that's what it is. But whenever it is going to be finally built, I'll believe it when I see it. It's hard to believe. This has gone on, and these type of meetings have gone on for years, and it appears that, and I realize you're all trying to do your best, but my God, only on Bowen, nothing seems to be accomplished. But 20% increase, to me, it's amazing. But c'est la vie, that's the way it is.
Essentially, that increase, and I'll talk about that a little bit more after we finish talking about the capital budget, but it's going towards your capital reserves, which are used for renewal and replacement. So contribution to those reserves in previous years has been light in comparison to the replacement value of the Tunstall Bay infrastructure. So we don't have adequate reserves if we had been contributing an adequate amount to those reserves, essentially we wouldn't have to borrow to replace infrastructure, and we would have the funding in place to be able.
And why wasn't that suggested 5 years ago? Instead of just leaving it as it is, and as you know, every year probably taking a little bit less because of the salaries and everything else goes up.
So one of the things is, I mean,
we're not being proactive.
Municipalities are at different stages in respect to understanding their asset infrastructure deficit. So we're relatively new at the asset management side of things here. And so focus has really been turned to that at Bowen Island probably in about 2015 or 16. And we're still working towards understanding what our infrastructure funding needs will be going forward in terms of our long-term infrastructure needs. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a couple of your future slides to give you some more information.
Raj, can I have one thing to say? It's Gay Coots. Can you hear me?
Certainly, Gay.
Yep.
Okay, my one question is, I understand that Cape Roger Curtis is tied into our water system for emergency purposes like fire and that. Is that correct?
Patrick would have to answer that. I don't know.
Wilson was answering that earlier before you joined.
Oh, sorry. Okay,
It's
my
okay.
question is, why are they not financially contributing to this? Because if they have a fire out there, they can drain our tank in 20 minutes. And I've been told that by previous fire chiefs. So I'm just wondering why we're not getting a contribution from the Cape. Because that would solve huge issues financially as well.
No, I don't believe Cape Roger Curtis is on the Tunstall Bay water system.
No,
It
but
is
the
for
water is
emergency and for fire.
when there was a fire a couple of years ago. Where did they take it from? They took it from obviously the fastest place, and that was Tunstall Bay Reservoir.
That's correct.
Yes.
So
That's
if I
correct.
can answer that in a different way,
Okay.
this reservoir is not being put in place for the benefit of Cape Roger Curtis. So it's being put in to meet the operations of the Tunstall Bay system. And Cape Roger Curtis being there is not adding any stress to the system. So that would probably be an argument for them not contributing to the operating expenses of the Tunstall Bay water system. And in part that would be their argument for not contributing to the replacement cost. And they're also not part of the established. So basically, they're not part of the local area service for Tunstall Bay. So the recovery of charges come from the Tunstall Bay local area service. And you would actually have to try and expand that local area service to include them. And that would mean that you would have to basically go through the LAS, the local area service procedures to change the establishment boundaries.
Thank you, Raj.
I think the other thing is all the houses out there, if I'm correct, I think they've all been required to be sprinklered. So I think the situation where there was the fire a few years ago was some camper had a little beach fire or something.
That was one of them.
Oh, yeah, yeah. And then there was the fellow's camper that exploded, but I think they got
Yeah.
that quite quickly. I don't think they needed to, the tanker would have come full probably.
Yeah, it just seems that if they can draw on our water service for emergencies like that, it just seems a shame that we can't get some sort of collection.
But it
But-
it happens all around the island. Like everybody
Yeah,
on Adams Road, do they go and draw on Cove Bay to fill up the tank or whatever, because they don't have,
Oh,
yeah.
Alison, I fully understand that, but it just seems like everything is done piecemeal. There's no blanket policy. Do you understand that? It's
Well, that's part of
it's
the
very
problem.
frustrating. It's very frustrating.
As the fire chief said, the fastest place to get the water was here. And
Yeah.
the truth of the matter is why Roger Curtis doesn't have to have a standing amount of water for something like a fire is surprising, but that is another matter.
Oops.
Coming back to the operating budget, folks, are there any more questions on the operating budget before I move over to capital budget? There being none, I'm gonna, this slide is a little bit too big to see it all. Here we go. Here we've got the operating budget for 2021 to 2022. We have at present included a provision for the reservoir replacement tank of $760,000, which we've had quite a bit of discussion about. And essentially we have a $10,000 provision for repairs and replacement of various pieces of equipment that may be required. What I wanted to kind of talk about here is what we include in the budget for 2021 is a provision for essentially expenditures. However, if any of these expenditures are not incurred, then that funding gets returned back to the reserves. Items are funded from reserves to the extent that the reserve balance is sufficient to fund those items. So as you can see, the estimated Tunstall Bay reserve balance, this should say 2021, my apologies on that, is anticipated to be $261,000. And it is the balance in the reserve is not sufficient to replace the Tunstall Bay tank. So we would require external borrowing or a special levy up front to be able to fund the replacement of the reservoir. If you have any questions on any of the other items included in capital, I would ask you to refer them to Patrick. Patrick, did you want to go over any of the items there or provide further explanation?
Sure. So, I mean, the reservoir is the capital project that we've talked about. The estimate has a high contingency in it because we don't have a detailed, we don't have the details sorted out yet. We'll be getting better estimates in the near future on that. A number of these items were put forward in the budget for last year or for 2020. And we've had a number of priorities in addressing problems in other water systems, and we haven't moved forward with everything we wanted to. One of the items here is moving towards a remote meter reading so that we don't have to have staff manually reading all the water meters. So there would be a planning process for that and then an implementation. And this is just reflecting a prorated share of that project for the Tunstall Bay water system. last year, when Glenn was acting in this capacity, recommended a water master plan for the island, which would look at the overall demand and water sources and asset management of existing systems and other issues relating to planning for delivery of water on the island. There was the general feedback from the LACs was that spending that amount of money on master planning wasn't the priority at this point. So we are proceeding with pieces of the master plan. For example, the aquifer study I mentioned earlier, looking at the sustainability of water supply for Grafton Lake, moving forward with asset management planning. So this is really just an allowance to include budget provisions for master planning that we may want to move forward with. I mentioned it might involve looking at having a closer look at the Tunstall Bay aquifer and planning for that. There's the provision for repair and replacement, which allows us to improve and replace equipment and infrastructure that breaks. The enhancement of GIS database, this is more, and we went through this with a previous LAC meeting yesterday, maybe better to describe it as asset management planning. And part of that is completion of a GIS-based asset register where we have, ultimately we want to understand all of the infrastructure that we have a good spatial database, identify the remaining service life for all of our infrastructure, and have a long range, say 30-year capital plan for replacing that infrastructure and upgrading it where required. And then the last item is relating to improving the reliability and effectiveness of our water system monitoring and data collection. And again, it's an allowance that's prorated based on number of connections in the water systems. And that's, if there's questions about those items, address those.
Is everyone clear on all those?
This might be an appropriate place where we talked about, so the 760,000 at this point is a placeholder for the tank. And once we get a better estimate, we get an estimate of what that cost will be, then we'll have to have another LAC meeting, because at that point we'll know what we need to borrow, and we'll need a recommendation from the LAC to council with respect to a funding strategy. So just to provide a little bit more information in terms of a funding strategy, I had included a little idea down below that if we were going to pay for the $760,000 up front, it would imply a cost of about $5,900 per user within the system based on 130 users. By the same token, there is financing available. So if we were going to finance the water tank through the Municipal Finance Authority through an equipment loan, which would require a council resolution, the cost would approximately be about $1,200 per connected property per year. If the water system or the LAC wanted to fund this through a 10-year amortization, then there'd be an additional step required in the process, in that we would require electoral assent. So you'd have to have 51% of the Tunstall Bay connected properties approve approve equipment financing for a term longer than 5 years. And we would also require a council resolution, and that would work out to a cost of approximately $600 per year per connected property for 10 years to pay for that water tank. So it just gives you a little bit more information in terms of the scope of the cost of a $760,000 tank. And we'll get Steph to send a copy of this PowerPoint presentation out to you as well to have a look at. And I'm going to go back to the capital budget request. The other thing that I wanted to mention was we had talked about the estimated reserve balance of 261,000 and the need to increase the contribution to reserves. So the need to increase the contribution to reserves is based on the replacement value of the infrastructure in Tunstall Bay. So the Tunstall Bay infrastructure has a replacement value of approximately $4.1 million. And it can be broken down into the various areas as listed on the screen here. So the wells are valued at about $535K, the supply line to the reservoir at $640K, the reservoir itself at a replacement cost of about $454K, et cetera, and the chlorination stations and PRV stations at $770K, and your water mains and your infrastructure has a replacement cost of about $1.1 million. In contrast to the replacement value, as you saw in your slide here, your reserves have $261,000 to address that replacement value cost. Now, you wouldn't have to replace your infrastructure all in one shot, but best practice is that a contribution for new infrastructure should be about 1% of the replacement value of that infrastructure. So by best recommendations, we should be, if this was brand new infrastructure, we should be putting aside $41,000 a year into reserves. And if we go back to the operating slide here, you can see that the expenditure to the transfer to surplus and reserves approved for 2021 is above that range. We're at about 77,200, but our balances are light. So contributions in the past have been light, and that's probably been due to, in actual fact, expenditures being more operating expenditures being funded through utility rates than the amount that was being contributed to the surplus. Because when you take a look at 2019, you can see, for example, there was only a $31,000 contribution to the reserve.
Mm-hmm.
And that's all I have in terms of your financial slides. Happy to answer any further questions.
Raj, when you send that PowerPoint and I turn it into a PDF, will that hidden part be visible?
It'll be in the note, so you might have to extract it. It is in the notes at the bottom. I'll put
Anybody else have questions?
So I'll put that into a separate slide for you, Steph, so that it shows up as a slide.
Do any LAC members have questions about, do you want to put the capital budget slide back up for to look at? Any questions about these capital budget items? Or about the funding? So if you say February, Raj, they should be prepared to make a recommendation on funding strategy. Yes.
I believe that's when Patrick and Glenn had indicated that we would have a better cost estimate or more accurate cost estimate of what it's going to cost. So yeah, that timing, if it would have to be aligned with that timing.
One question from me is if we do pay the assessment of what is that, $5,900, basically $6,000, do we still have a 20% increase in
Hmm.
2021, 15% 2022? Or can we just do it with a one knock it with the one assessment?
It's hard to answer. The answer to that will be the outcome of the asset management information that comes in terms of what the replacement needs of your infrastructure will be over the next 30 years. Because as you can see, your estimated reserve balance is about 261,000. And your annual contribution to reserves seems to be in the right neighborhood for your outer years, or reasonable. However, your reserve balance appears relatively light in comparison to. So we have a better answer to that once we have better asset management information in terms of what the anticipated replacement costs over the long term would be, and then we'd be able to average that out to an annual basis to see what your level of reserves is.
Because it just seems that, okay, we do a 20% increase, another 15% increase.
Mm-hmm.
It never does come off. Once it's paid for, we'll still be putting a good, a lot into our reserve that we may not need that much going into a reserve. You're following me there?
Yeah, it's
Like,
hard for
20% increase is pretty substantial, as Peter was saying.
Yeah, I can't argue with that. It is a substantial increase, and again, as I mentioned earlier, I mean, it is going to your reserves to fund future infrastructure replacement needs.
So Raj, at 5,900 per user, is that, I'm trying to do the math here with my calculator, that doesn't deduct any of the reserve balance off the 760.
That's correct. I've assumed that you'd be funding the total replacement of the reservoir.
Because I think
not using the reserve.
I think they increased their reserve contribution or consciously in order to put money away for the tank.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then how much is in there? They've got money sitting in surplus, but I assume that's not too much.
There's not a material amount. I'd have to look that up. I'll look that up offline, Allison. But that would not contribute significantly.
And is the 760, did you divide it by the connected and unconnected, or just connected?
Just the connected properties.
So the unconnected should pay for that too.
I agree.
So that would take a little bit more practice.
That takes it down to about
connected,
52.
so it would change. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that would bring it down a bit.
Yes. Thank you, Allison.
You're welcome.
I think in general, the system's undercapitalized. I mean, even separately from the reservoir tank, there's 3.5 million or more of infrastructure. We need to get a better handle on what that value is that will need to be replaced at various times over the next 30, 50 years. And we need to have capital reserves to address that.
So what's the estimated useful life of the water pipes in the ground, Patrick? What are they?
Well, that can be a long time. You can
Ductile iron, is it not?
Depends on the pipe. Depends on the situation.
So ductile iron is what, 70 years or 50 years or?
Well, it can be 50 years or
Yeah,
more.
I remember looking it up. So if Tunstall Bay was developed in 1970, it's sticking in my mind. Is that right?
Yes, that's
Correct.
about.
Yeah, then
That's
we've
about
been
60
50
years.
years. Yeah. So that ductile iron piping is 50 or 60 years old.
And then your PRV stations and chlorination stations are going to have a much lower life than that. And some of the PRV stations are probably in the next 5 years need to be replaced. So there's a whole range of estimated service life, cost of replacement that has to be understood and compiled into a asset management plan for the system. So,
One other question on that is, the 20% increase, will that also go towards the water meter upgrades that we talked about last meeting or the meeting
So
before?
indirectly, it will, because that most of that 20% increase is going into your reserves.
Yeah.
Reserves are what's used to fund capital items. So your capital items are funded through your reserve balance.
Okay.
So part of the discussion will be if any of the reserve balance gets used for the water tank or if it gets kept for all the other stuff.
Right.
Okay.
Okay, well, I think the proposed recommendation that, do you want to stop share, Raj?
Yep, I'll do that right now. Thanks.
We have, sorry, I'll share mine. Can you see?
Yep.
Oops, okay, so I don't think we have any comments. I think everybody's in understanding of the operating and capital budgets, and will be able to recommend to council. They be included in the 5-year financial plan. Okay, can I, Doug, would you mind reading this recommendation?
I'm sorry. I think you're Peter. I'm not sure what you're referring to here.
Somebody needs to move that recommendation by reading it out.
Ooh,
I
okay.
move that.
Okay, can you read it?
I move that the Tunstall Bay Water System Local Advisory Committee recommend that council direct staff to include the Tunstall Bay Water System 2021, sorry, it's hard to read, 2025 operating and capital budgets as presented at its December 2nd, 2020 meeting to the Bone Island Municipality 2021-2025 5-year financial plan. Did I get it?
You
did it.
Very good.
Yay.
Well done.
Hey, I did gold star.
Second it.
All in favor? Can I see your hands?
All in favor.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Okay, moving on. Thank you very much, Raj.
Thank you.
I've got a section on funding options.
So you're going to apply for the planning infrastructure grant?
Planning grants and capital grants.
I mean, we're always looking out for capital grants. I don't have anything particular to say on that. I think generally getting capital or infrastructure grants for capital replacement is more difficult than for new infrastructure.
Or for quality upgrades?
Or yeah, well, I guess this is a quality upgrade, so it's possible.
I meant by the quality of the water, not the, yeah.
Well, the quality of the fire protection and the storage capacity is upgraded, but it's a tougher sell than, you know, if you're building a new treatment plant or something like that.
Okay, thank you.
Need a motion? We've already got one on the books for applying for the planning grant. So do we need another one? From last?
We have, I didn't think so.
You don't need another one, Raj? We're good
We're good. Sorry.
for applying for the 10,000 planning grants?
I think staff will apply for, I mean, if the LAC wishes to direct, it would direct council to advise council to direct staff to apply for available funds. They can do so, but staff is doing that in any event. So,
Okay, because that was in the last year's recommendations in that November 2019 report to council. So, okay.
it'd be up to the LAC if they want to make that recommendation to council. Again, it's a recommendation to council, so staff won't be doing anything differently whether the recommendation is made or not. They seek funding or grant opportunities as they're available.
Okay, but the planning grant is an open
Oh, okay.
intake. So if Patrick's going to apply for the planning grant, we don't need to do the resolution again.
Sounds like Patrick's already operating
Yeah, I
that
think
way.
he said he was going to.
Okay, I've got a last section for members of the public to participate. Again, anybody would like to ask questions of LAC or staff or council? McDonald, I think you're the only public right now. Hearing none.
I'm good, thank you.
Okay, well, and then for information items, we have notes from our information meeting in September. And we have your bylaw, rates bylaw, and a copy of the RFP for the design improvements for the island. And I think we're done. So I'd like to thank you very much for your volunteer time.
I have one question off to the side, if possible.
You want to go back to the slide?
It has to do with the water quality. I know, Peter, you had it when we had that meeting quite some time ago. Is there a chance that I know the water is tested off my property there every day. Is there a chance that I can find out what's in the water? A copy of that? Because when I fill my tank, for instance, on my motorhome, I get a quite a sulfury smell, whereas I don't get it anywhere else in the province. I just kind of like to know what is in the water, if possible.
The test results are attached to the annual report.
Okay.
So I can also send the latest ones to you by email if you like.
I would like that, please.
The daily testing that is happening is for chlorine residuals.
Okay, thank you.
That report should be linked to the minutes that are linked to this agenda as well.
Yeah, and the information item on the last page, it's got the notes from the September 15th community information meeting, and the links to the annual report to Vancouver Coastal Health would have all those test results in it.
Oh, very good, thank you.
Great. Any more questions?
Go out and enjoy the last little bit of the sunshine.
Little
Okay.
bit.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Have a good evening.
Bye.